What's up, yo? Welcome to Your One Life. I'm your host, Kim Young Kim, and I'm so happy to have you as a listener today. If you are new here, I want to give you the scoop on what this podcast is all about. This podcast is about teaching you from the greatest minds in the world, helping you in all aspects of your life, and also assist you in making it rain, throw money down the drain, regret your decisions as you're living with the pain. That's right, baby. It's all about spend now, cry later. Now, I will say, before we get into the next section of the book, the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, I think I failed to make clear that Naval, even though he talks about building wealth and encourages people to do it, he also is very much against the love of money and greed. And one of the things that he said in the first section of the book is, when you are someone who is in love with money, you get punished immediately as you get the money, because what that money does when it comes in is it creates a desire for more money, and you should never have the love of money. Wealth is a tool to help you to own your own time and to get freedom, and that's what he's all about. So I wanted to make sure I cleared up the air on that in case you got the wrong idea about what Naval is all about. All right, so we're on to part 2 of the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, written by Eric Jorgensen. Shout out to Eric Jorgensen for putting this book together, by the way. And this section I'm going to talk about today is about judgment. Now, I want to start today's episode with a quote that I really like that goes, "Wisdom is always an overmatch for strength." Phil Jackson. Now, wisdom is super important, and everyone could use more wisdom in their life. Now, the way Naval describes wisdom is this. Wisdom is knowing the long-term consequences of your actions. Applying wisdom to external problems is judgment. Judgment is how you make good decisions, and you need good judgment in your life. You need to understand what the long-term consequences of your choices are going to be. For example, maybe you are thinking about renting an apartment next door to a CC's Pizza. You got to ask yourself, is this a good idea? Is it a good idea when they have all-you-can-eat pizza for however 99? It's a catchy song, by the way. Is it a good idea to live right next door to somewhere that has the 28-inch pizza challenge? Yep, that's 28 inches in diameter, and part of the challenge is you can't throw up while you're eating your pizza. That sounds like toxic pizzativity to me. Oh my God, why did I just do that? Why? Please forgive me. Anyways, you need some wisdom and good judgment in your life, because when you have that, what happens is you go and make good decisions. And one of the things that he says, which I think is super, super important, is the direction you're heading in matters more than how fast you move, especially with leverage. And that is very true. I've seen people make decisions in the wrong direction and waste years of their life doing something that they probably should have never gotten into in the first place. I actually know this one lady who got a master's degree in chemistry, and then it turned out that the fumes of chemicals actually bothered her a lot to the point where she couldn't work with them, which I'm sure she was really disappointed when she had to shut down her meth lab. These are jokes, by the way. But in all seriousness, I don't understand how you can get that far into a program like that and not realize how much those chemicals affect you and bother you as you're working with them. But I myself have gone the wrong direction in my own life, so I do understand about making bad decisions and going down a road that you probably shouldn't have. On the flip side, there are people out there who have made really good decisions and maybe not gone as fast as one would think you would need to be successful, but because they were in the right direction and because they have leverage, which is something Naval mentions in that quote, they were able to be successful. Actually, the founders of Warby Parker, when they came up with the idea, all 4 of the founders actually kept their day jobs as they started to build the company. Even though it looked like a great idea, even though it looked like they had a lot of demand coming, they still didn't rush in like something you would see in a movie, but that's what they decided to do. And because they had scale, because they were able to have a bunch of glasses manufactured, they were able to be successful. And they were able to take on Luxottica, which is a wretched glasses cartel that monopolizes the industry of glasses. And they're the reason why your glasses are so expensive. Turns out the devil does wear Prada glasses, or at least makes them. I'm not going to spend any more time talking about Luxottica, but I will drop a link to a video to help you understand why they suck so much. All right, back to our regularly scheduled program on Naval's section on judgment. Now, one of the big things he talks about is accepting reality for what it is, right? He says the number one thing clouding us from being able to see reality is we have these preconceived notions of the way things should be. Now, you and I both know that the world is not the way it should be, that people don't act the way they should. And the moment that you accept this is the moment that your life is going to become better. Because a lot of suffering is based in the thought of the way the world should be and how it's not lining up to your ideals. And so what you got to do is you got to accept the way things are. You can't control the way people behave. And so you just have to learn to accept things the way they are. For example, maybe after your mom's divorce, she ends up dating a guy who you actually used to bully in middle school. And then he ends up becoming your stepdad. Well, you know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like karma. It also sounds like a very slow-cooked dish of revenge. Wow. I don't know if he thought that through all those years. But if he did, I guess he got the last laugh, right? But in all seriousness, the world is not the way it should be. People don't act the way they should. In my previous podcast called Young Legends, I actually interviewed a 4-time Olympian named Shantae Lowe. She's amazing, by the way. And she said people would be doing performance-enhancing drugs, and she had to accept that as a reality. She had to compete clean, and that's exactly what she did. Also, I know people who are working in the movie business right now, and right now the TV and film business is really jacked up, really not good for people working in the business, particularly on the production side. But they have to accept that as reality because that's what it is. It is reality. You can't sit there and wish things were different right now. It is what it is, and they have to accept that as their new reality. Otherwise, they will not go forward in life. And not to sit here and say I don't feel bad for them. I'm just saying if they don't accept it and move forward, then all that is doing is holding them back from the next chapter in their lives. So one of the things that Naval advises is make your ego small because your ego doesn't want to deal with the truth. You have to know that ego is the enemy, like Ryan Holiday said. And your ego will stop you from thriving in life. And the more you want a certain outcome, the less like you are to be able to see the truth. For example, if you're breaking up with somebody and it's just not going to work out, your friends were probably going to be telling you, hey, yeah, that is one that you need to let go. That person is not right for you. But because you want that relationship so bad, you don't want to accept it as a reality. So you have to focus on making your ego small. Because if you don't, what'll happen is you will end up like some of these former giants in the industry who refused to get with the times, who had massive egos that wouldn't allow them to change with the way things were going. For example, Sears, Kodak, the Jonas Brothers, all used to dominate, and look at them now. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. Now, regarding reality, here's a quote of Naval's that I absolutely love. What you feel tells you nothing about the facts. It merely tells you something about your estimate of the facts. Boom, that's a mic drop right there. And your feelings don't tell you anything, so you have to be honest about what is actually happening. You have to be honest about where you're at because the truth will set you free, but first, it will piss you off and it'll also hurt. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to have the best lives possible, and part of that is assessing where you actually are. So he's real big about being honest about where he's at with people he works with investors, so on and so forth. So he doesn't create this illusion of reality. And if you do not face the truth, what's going to end up happening is you're going to delay the inevitable and you're just creating more problems down the road. Now, going back to relationships, I know people that were in relationships that were terrible, but because they weren't straight up about the state of affairs, nobody really understood how bad the situation was. And then it just made the breakup that much more difficult for them. Side note, if you are with a woman who forces you to wear cardigan sweaters every day, otherwise she won't hold your hand in public, that's a red flag. Just an FYI, in case you didn't know. Now, in order to have good judgment, one of the things that he says is you need to give time to breathe, give time to think, take 1 or 2 days off a week so you can just think. Because you will have good ideas when you are still and you are thinking, not when you're busy running around, not when you're doing all sorts of activity, but when you're just chilling and thinking. And being still and being bored is something that we are just really not doing well in society right now. But it is where you're going to have good ideas, revelations. And so you got to take time to do just this. A big theme in this section of the book is change. He says, everything redesigns, so should you. Everything redesigns over time, right? Chuck Taylors used to actually be basketball shoes that people played in. We don't hoop in those anymore, and that's a good thing. So what you got to do is you got to look at yourself and redesign yourself and realize that you develop these habits in your life to survive or because of your conditioning. And here's the deal. You can change and you should change in order to have a better life. And using a phrase like, this is just the way I am, is not going to help you to move forward in life. And you ever notice when people say that, it's never anything positive. It's always something negative. It's like, oh yeah, I steal my coworkers' prescription drugs and take them to see which side effects mentioned, and the commercials actually show up in my body. This is just the way I am. Maybe today is the day that you say, that was the way I was, and now I'm going to deprogram my mind. Because that's what he talks about doing. Deprogram your mind, let go of the identity that no longer serves you. And what you got to ask yourself is this habit, is this way of life helping me become healthier, happier, achieve my goals? And if it's not, it's time to change. And not to sit here and say that change is easy, but it is possible. And a question you need to ask yourself is, what's the alternative? And can I live with that? And usually the answer is no. So what he says is you need to let go of your identity. And this includes things like your national identity too. Just because you're from a certain country doesn't mean you need to subscribe to everything within that culture. For example, just because you're American doesn't mean you need to live in a big house. Just because you're a hipster doesn't mean you need to live in a tiny house or a warehouse or use a typewriter instead of a computer. But the key is, he says, you need to look at everything that comes with an identity and reject certain parts of that identity, and really not to subscribe to any identity at all, but to really think about what it is you agree with, what it is you don't agree with, and let that be what informs your beliefs. All right, so the next section is about how to decide and what should be your guiding light as you decide. He says you need some principles. You need some mental models from Charlie Munger, Nassim Taleb, and Benjamin Franklin too. Mental models is the name of the game. And you know what I love about Naval Ravikant? He references the greats. He is not shy to shout out these brilliant people in the world that influences him. That's when you know you're dealing with somebody who is guiding you right when they don't have all the answers. They look for answers with other people. And I'm shouting him out as I'm low-key shouting myself out as well, right? All right, so what are mental models? According to Naval, mental models are compact ways to recall your own knowledge. And of course, you need experience behind these mental models themselves. So here's a mental model, the margin of safety. What the margin of safety does is it protects you from catastrophe, and it's something that they use in architecture, in buying stocks, but also something you can use in your own life where you have extra money in the bank or extra plasma in your body to convert into money in case a financial emergency shows up. Another thing he espouses when making decisions is avoiding stupidity is key. So what you got to do is you got to eliminate what's not going to work and not make mistakes. And I know that this sounds opposite to a lot of the things that you see on social media and all those other places where they talk about the importance of making mistakes. But making mistakes sometimes can be super costly and can throw your entire life off track. Making mistakes can make you bankrupt. Making mistakes can create all sorts of havoc in your health. And so you do have to think about what is definitely not going to work, because if it definitely wouldn't work, why would you do it in the first place? And if you disagree with what I'm saying right now, go back and watch the Titanic. And one of the ways that he says to make good decisions is to learn microeconomics, to learn game theory, to learn about the principal agent problem, to learn about compound interest. These are things that are super important for you to understand so that you will be successful. And if you don't understand compound interest, just think about a snowball going down a hill, getting bigger and bigger, and taking out your mom's new husband. The further down the hill he is, the better off you are. And that's how compound interest works as well. Also, you need to learn about probability and statistics. And here's one thing he talked about that I thought was really good. As you make decisions, if you can't decide on a difficult decision, like whether or not you should go on 90 Day Fiancé, or during your 90 days, should y'all get matching tattoos? If you can't decide, then the answer is no. By the way, shout outs to the television producers who decided to exploit people who are hungry for American citizenship and attention. But in all seriousness, when it comes to difficult decisions of big things like marrying someone, taking a job, buying a house, and going into business with someone, if you can't decide, the answer is no, because these are long-term decisions that will have consequences for years to come. And again, he's just telling you, don't make big mistakes. Now, speaking of having choices, he says if you have two choices that are pretty equal, take the path that's more difficult and painful in the short term. Because the way we're wired is we're wired to avoid pain in the short term, but most things that are short-term pain lead to long-term gain. And he mentions he doesn't like to exercise, but when he exercises, what ends up happening is he becomes stronger, his mood is better, and his health overall is better. And I was jogging just last night, and as I was running, my stomach started hurting, and I was like, man, I probably shouldn't have ate 2.5 feet of pizza right before I started running, and I probably shouldn't have moved right next to a CC's Pizza. But in all seriousness, he says, exercise your body. He says, exercise your mind, read above your punching weight, and you'll feel pain because you won't understand the things that you're learning. But guess what? You are learning and you are stretching yourself. And that's the only way you're going to grow is by stretching yourself. And he talks a lot about reading in this book. And that's what this next section is about. It's about reading and it's about learning. And he says, look, we're in the age of TikTok, IG Reels, YouTube Shorts. And the problem is we are getting so used to getting bite-sized information, but the bite-sized information is not helping us and it's causing us to become reliant on short-form content. And we're just snacking all day instead of eating meals. And I've seen this with Dr. Julie Smith, who wrote a book that I did a 4-episode series on. And I started looking at her YouTube shorts, and they just weren't very in-depth in helping. And then I started looking at her longer form videos, and those were more helpful. But her book, Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before, is what was super helpful in explaining how we can maintain our mental health so that we can have productive and fulfilling lives. And so what he says is what you got to do is you got to start reading. You got to stop saying TLDR, which stands for too long, didn't read. And you got to read 1 to 2 hours a day. If you read 1 to 2 hours a day, that puts you in the top 0.0001% of people because most people don't read. And this is what will help you thrive and change your life. And he said when he was a kid, he was in the friend zone with books. His friends were books. His mom would drop him off at the library, and he would spend all his time with them. And that's a good place to be, honestly, because books can't spend all your money at Sephora when they're having a bad day. By the way, I'm talking about myself here. But for real, books are very important, and we need to spend as much time as we can reading books. And this is a section of the book where Naval comes off as very bipolar, and I realized how hard it was for Eric Jorgensen to put this book together. Because here's what Naval says. You need to learn to love how to read. You need to read what makes you happy until you love reading. And he also says the best books to read are the ones you're into. But what if you're into Twilight? Or what if you're into something that is not helpful to your life? At that point, the question is, should you read it? Because here's another thing he says in the book. You know that song that you can't get out of your head? All thoughts work like that. Careful what you read. And I would also say careful what you allow into your mind. So it sounds like what Naval is saying is read books, but also have some standards with the books you read. Because here's the problem with books. Some people have written more books than they've actually read. And the problem is there is no IQ test that you have to pass in order to publish a book. Sometimes all you need is a pulse and a pretty smile. And that's a problem, right? We don't want to be learning from those kind of people. And so what he says is you need to have a good foundation. A good foundation is critical. And as you read things, they become your foundational knowledge. So you don't want things like The Secret or the pickup artist book, The Game, to be your foundational knowledge. And another thing he says is if they wrote it to make money, don't read Joel Osteen. I threw that last part in. But real talk, don't read Joel Osteen. And he keys in on this idea of having good foundational knowledge by saying he knows a bunch of well-read people who aren't very smart. And he says they're not smart because their foundation is bad or they filter everything through a faulty worldview. Imagine if you base your life on the teachings of Paris Hilton, who also has a memoir that just came out. And I will say, if they wrote it to be relevant again, don't read it. But imagine, if your life was based on the teachings of Paris Hilton, you would be doomed. And thankfully, we have the Kardashians to come in and show us the way. So the way I take this entire message is read books that you're excited about, but also positively impact your life, or at least don't negatively impact your life. And he says you don't need to read a bunch of books. What you need to do is read maybe 100 of the great books over and over to develop a good foundational base. And of course, he has some really good book recommendations for you to check out. And as I look for books myself, what I do is I look to people like Naval to recommend me really good books because I trust that they will lead me right. And that's how I filter through a lot of the junk. Because he says there's a lot of junk out there. There's a lot of bad books out there, and you need to stop wasting your time reading garbage. And another thing he says is the amount of books you read is just a vanity metric. It doesn't matter how many books you read. You don't have to finish a book if it's not a good book. You can put it down, you can skim through it, you can get the gist of it, and then move on from there. Also, when it comes to solving problems that have been around for a very long time, like how to interact with your family members, how to live a good life, so on and so forth, he says, look to the classics, because the classics are classic for a reason. They have stood the test of time, and if people are still reading them, they probably have something good in them. One of the classics being Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, who is recommended by many, many smart people on something that you should base your life on. And what he says you need to do is you need to read the greats in math, science, and philosophy. And as you read, you're going to feel confused sometimes, and that's okay because that's like having pain in the gym. And pain leads to growth when you're building up your mind, just like it does when you are building up your body. And as you're struggling to understand things that you're reading, just remember this quote. I'm always doing things I can't do. That's how I get to do them. Pablo Picasso. And the way he says you're going to be able to remember the things that you're reading is to explain what you learn to someone else. Because what he says is teaching forces learning. I'm actually learning through this podcast as I'm teaching you about these books. And you may not have a podcast, but you can still talk to people about what you read, about anything you learn. And you can even teach people about what you learn from this podcast. Shameless plug. But in all seriousness, you can teach people anything you learn, and that will help you to learn. It'll reinforce the things that you ingested in your mind, and then it'll become a part of your knowledge. All right, let me wrap that up real quick. Yo, you want to be a savage, you got to grab the classics, you got to understand a whole lot of wisdom that is ancient. I'm just painting a picture for you, and we come through, and sometimes you got to put a book down. You don't need to finish it. You need to be winning it all the freaking time, because that is a metric of vanity, of insanity. So understand this. You got to be on a path, learn up the math and the science, so you could be a giant up in your life, and probably philosophy, what you just need, so you could drop seeds up in your mind from the Stoics, also Epicureans. I'm just Kiriman with a bunch of rhymes, and I just work out all the freaking time up in my mind, and then I just teach it. And that's what I'm saying. I come through and speak it, so I could just have it up in my head. And that's what I said. I just read a whole bunch of books and gave them to you. And that's what I'm saying. When I come through, I spit out the top, and that's how I go. Naval Ravikant, up in the flow. All right, so that's all I got for this episode. If you're new here, please hit the follow button so that you do not miss future episodes. And if you've been listening and you enjoy this podcast, please rate and review the podcast in Apple Podcasts and also Spotify. That helps people to find it. I'll be back next week to wrap up part 3 of this series on the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I hope you apply these teachings to your life. Shout out to my dude Siraj for making the instrumental for this podcast, and props to you for the cool things you're going to do with the things you learned in today's episode. This is Your One Life. I'm Kim Young Kim. Hope you have a great day, a great week, and until next time, peace.